Welcome, everyone. So, I'm going to talk about three unexpected challenges that people experience in the later stages of spiritual awakening. And so, I would say that this is for people who have worked through kind of their personal stuff, their childhood conditioning, as well as transpersonal conditioning. And so, that means ancestral past lives, have contemplated their place in the world, their relationship and connection to other people. Basically, there aren't a whole lot of barriers left. But sometimes people imagine the later stages of spiritual awakening to be a state of perfection, or like more commonly, a state of experience that is without any difficulty. They just kind of imagine it as a state of bliss, and nothing else. But there are some unexpected difficulties that do arise even when somebody has moved beyond their personal as well as transpersonal conditioning and a vast majority of their belief systems. So the first difficulty that is unexpected is a lack of desire. And so some of you may be thinking, well, that's what I was really looking for. That's what, whatever Buddhist doctrine or whatever thought, has come my way, is that the sense of desire should drop. That was really a goal on the path for some of you. And so, what I will say about this is that, yes, during spiritual awakening, you look at your desires and you start to see that a lot of them come from wounding. There is a sort of recalibration period that is necessary for people who are going through more intermediate stages of awakening, where they recognize that a lot of their desires to achieve, to compete, to complete come from a wounded place. Basically, they are coming from a place in which the person wants to prove something to themselves or to other people, especially kind of the parents, where they don't feel good enough, and so they need to keep on putting themselves out there into the world in the hopes of it getting mirrored back that, yes, they are worthy, yes, they are wonderful and special. All of these things come from a very wounded place. And so somebody during spiritual awakening will eventually broach all of these things. What parts of me do not feel good enough, special enough, worthy enough, just as I am? A good question for beginning and intermediate sort of phases of the path is asking yourself, if I never completed anything ever again, can I still be worthy? This gets us to the point of understanding that no matter who we are and what we achieve, we are worthy and we are lovable. In Carl Rogers' terminology, we are worthy of receiving unconditional positive regard, even if we are no longer in a space of projecting our self-worth outward into the world in hopes of it mirroring back some basic self-worth, self-regard for us to sort of absorb it, digest it within our systems. The difficulty moving forward is that what happens when all of this drops? What happens when you get to a place where you no longer need to prove to your worth, where you no longer need to prove to parents or authority figures that you're worthwhile or lovable? What happens when you move beyond conditioning, where you realize, things about capitalism, things about the world, how it conditions us to want to achieve specific things that we don't, we can question whether they are aligned with our personal values and drop completely. Um, and so when we move past all of that conditioning, we can get to a place where our desires start to drop because we recognize all of that stuff that we've been doing in order to prove ourselves worthy to ourselves, to our parents, to the world, and all that we've been doing to sort of, the expression keep up with the Joneses, all we've been conditioned to be told that we are supposed to own, supposed to have, supposed to achieve by a specific age. For some people, this drop of desire happens quite suddenly, and it can take a bit to get used to, and they may even fight against it. For example, I have shared before that one of the desires that was most difficult for me to drop was my pursuit of knowledge. And so I went through a multi-year span where I wasn't able to read very much, but I was still trying to force myself to do things like go to workshops and seek out gurus and teachers and, you know, read and that sort of stuff, even though my soul, where I was in my path, no longer required that. It was more craving direct knowledge, direct interface, communion, those sorts of things. So, like my personal story, plenty of people struggle against this because we have been taught in our culture that anhedonia, loss of interest, is very much a sign of depression. And it very much can be, but it can also be a sign that somebody has moved past personal, transpersonal, as well as other conditionings that are telling them that they need to achieve something in order to be worthwhile. And so it can get a bit difficult to get used to this phase of the path where things sort of drop away. And so, what I would encourage people to do is to get a sense of who they are now and to look at their struggles to do things. Are they struggling to do things, because this is what society is telling them that they need to do or need to be? Or are they struggling to do things because they feel alienated, depressed, separated, alone, low energy? Those are all signs that it might be a worthwhile thing to look at. But in other avenues, like looking at emotions and stuff like that, past traumas, depression, all of that sort of stuff should be looked at first. Because the phase that I'm talking about, where people drop into this, they will basically be in a phase of emptiness. So, um, this is, a phase where there can be a sort of connected disconnection, I might call it. So somebody will feel connected to the world, connected to themselves, connected to all that is, and that very much energetically separates it from, somebody who's feeling disconnected and bogged down by emotions. That sort of picture of, kind of anhedonia, emotional suppression, that sort of stuff. But there is a phase beyond this, beyond that initial dropping of desire, where desire can come through again, but it is no longer wounded desire. It is more creative flow. So it is a connection with divinity, a connection with self, where there is a creative flow that can be felt through the system. And by working in conjunction with the divinity that flows through you, there can be creative output. In fact, there can be immense creative output. There just isn't desire in the same sense of, I am doing this to put this out into the world to gain some type of approval. It is more of I am feeling this flow move through me and I must create, I must move, I must paint, I must write, I must build furniture, whatever your thing is. Because that is what the current of energy flowing through me is coming out into sort of, doing. And so this type of, I'll call it desire, but it really isn't desire, comes from a place that is very soul-led instead of a wounded sort of place. So if anybody is struggling with desire and the dropping of desire, know that that is simply a phase and that you can move forward into the dropping of all desires that come from a wounded place into a place of pure or true creativity that flows through the system that does result in some type of output. So the second unexpected challenge that people tend to experience in the later stages of awakening, has to do about simplicity and about alienation. In my book, The Body Deva, I talked about how people are essentially like a tornado of chaos. We are used to having a certain amount of chaos in our lives, in our realities. And what actually happens, and Gabor Mate talks about this as well, is that if we do not have the same sort of speed of tornado going in and around our energy system, is that we will tend to create that chaos. We will tend to bring something up and out to make sure that tornado around, in and around us is sort of oscillating at the same speed. So there's an interesting aspect to this in terms of spiritual awakening. My favorite definition for what enlightenment is the end of conflict. And what I mean by that is that what emerges is a stillness instead of a chaos. All of the energy in and around us is no longer in conflict, is no longer the kind of these fights between all of these different parts of ourselves, because the parts of ourselves have experienced unity, have experienced integration. And so what happens in the later stages of the path is that this beautiful stillness emerges. I always tell people that if you want to find, kind of the spiritual teachers that are the most profound, that have the most realization, is to look for stillness. We have a tendency to look for chaos in our spiritual teachers rather than looking for stillness and looking for humanity. We look for chaos and we look for people pretending to be demigods, essentially. So we're looking for essentially narcissists, which has a lot of unfortunate consequences. But what happens when we get really deep in our spiritual path is that things become very simple. We either do things or we don't. Our days become, freed up of time, all of that sort of stuff, because we no longer have all these sort of conflicts playing out within ourselves or projected outwards. One of the things that happens when we get more and more perspective, though, is that we start to see and understand people are living out their own sort of tornado of chaos. That most people are stuck in cycles upon cycles of misery and unfortunateness and, disconnection. And so, what most people spend their time doing is projecting their inner chaos, their inner self-hatred, their inner whatever they're dealing with, their inner discontent outwards onto the world. And we can see this quite readily. For example, look at any comment for any YouTube, Instagram, anything like that. And it's just going to be so many people that are trying as hard as they can to push out their own dissatisfaction, their own self-hatred out into a safe space, which is the internet, where they won't receive any repercussions for it. We can also see this in the world where people are very much caught in a sea of projections of stuff that they're not aware of within themselves. We project our own inner conflicts outward onto other people and onto the world because they're shadow parts and we're not aware of them or we're not yet ready to deal with them. So what's the difficult part of this? Because as a person, as an individual, you experiencing greater and greater space from that, you taking back all of your projections, having that sort of peace and stability and, stillness that emerges there is a wonderful thing. It truly is. Often people go through a period of grief or heartbreak or something like that, looking at the noise and chaos and sort of self-hatred that other people have. It can be difficult to see, it can be difficult to look at. But beyond that period, there is a sort of paradoxical experience that a lot of people have difficulty navigating. And this is kind of the in the world but not of the world thought. You are no longer participating in the same amount of chaos, the same projecting of dissatisfaction or self-hatred of the self outward. You're no longer caught in those sort of series of things, or not caught in them as much. And so what this does is, in some ways, it connects you more to other people, it connects you to the world, because you can experience that unity. You can look at people and see where you and that other person connect, where a piece of you is within them. Sometimes I will look at people and it will be, a part of me that was, 6 months ago or 5 years ago or 15 years ago, but is still, I can see myself reflected in each person that I meet. And so there is this layer of things where there is an experience of unity, but there also at the same period of time is an experience of alienation and disconnection that people experience as well. Because there is a recognition that I am no longer participating in these same cycles. I am no longer, filling my life with chaos and projected energies and fights and conflicts and all this sort of stuff that we do inwardly and outwardly. And so there can be a period of time wherein people need to, in some cases, there can be removal from society where they go on a trek or, become a monk or something like that. Most people will have, long before this. Or there can just be a period of adjustment where people get used to um, being in this world a bit differently than other people, not having the same sort of chaos, and not getting pulled into the chaos of other people. Because what happens is that if we look at the parts of ourselves that still feel spiritually alienated, spiritually abandoned by God, by the divine, is that we can again find ourselves in a place that feels more coherent, in which this paradox is okay to experience, and we can again kind of go into this very human state of being fine and good with everybody and everything around us, even if we do not have the same sort of chaos that other people do. There can just be a simple expression of compassion or love, rather than this feeling of alienation, which comes from a state of separation, but a state of like sort of existential separation where people finally move beyond their personal chaos, but have not moved beyond, kind of um, this sort of consciousness that tells them that they are a separate or different human being than other people. So the last unexpected challenge that people have is that there tends to be an increase of physical pain later in the path when people are processing things, when people have energy flowing through them. And this happens for a couple of reasons. The first is that people are so used to emotional processing, having emotions come up in the first stages of the spiritual path, because we feel big things about our childhood, about society, about the world, about the divine. We have so much affect, so much feeling, and all of that needs to be witnessed and processed in a bodily way. So if you have hung with me in my work, you will know that I believe that spiritual awakening happens through the body, and that the ultimate expression of spiritual awakening is awakening through every cell, every tissue, every fiber of the body. Often people feel like we can just awaken in the head, or awaken outside of the body, ignore the body overall. But what I find happens in those experiences is that the body doesn't awaken. And so the conditioning, the karma, the emotional suppression, none of that sort of stuff gets resolved. And so the daily life, the reality of the person never really transforms, even if some of their thoughts do. So why physical pain? Why more physical pain? First, what we pay attention to during spiritual awakening shifts. So as emotions resolve, that backlog of emotions, all of our bodies sort of stores, gets resolved. What happens is that our channels become clearer, our body becomes clearer. So, and if we could add onto that emotional intelligence skills, like I offer in my book, Shadow Work for the Soul. I also on YouTube have a meditation called How to Feel, um, is that we can just have experience emotions and allow for them to flow through us. They no longer have mastery over us. We no longer are in fear or reaction to them. They can just flow through us. And so what happens after that on a bodily level? Well, first of all, is that if we no longer are spending so much time focused on our emotions, because we don't need to, they can just flow through us, is that we tend to have then physical health issues come to the forefront. So it is not unusual for people who are spiritual awakening to then need to look at their diet, their nutrition, their physical health, their, movement routines, stuff like that, to sort of reconfigure things. And this is not based off of belief system. It is based off of, at this point, what the body needs to have a certain amount of energy cycling through it, a certain amount of conscious awareness and expansion. So again, this does not come from belief. This comes from, quite frankly, somebody, for example, eating something and having the consciousness to realize, oh, my system doesn't like that, or oh, I've noticed a giant lowering in my consciousness because I have eaten that, or their body outright rejecting foods. This can also happen with exercise. If somebody is a couch potato, all of a sudden their body will very much show them where they creak, where they hurt, where they need to stretch, and they will recognize that, oh, I need to get some movement through my joints, through my body. I need to take care of my physical vessel. The other reason for physical pain is that if we are looking at the stages of awakening or kind of in-depth awakening, one thing we can consider is that in Chinese medicine, that the bones and the marrow and sort of the deep stuff in the body, the deep waters in the body, the bones, the joints, all of that sort of stuff, those are the deepest energies of the body, related to the deepest energies of the body. For example, our bones very much has to do with our ancestral history and, all sorts of interesting stuff like that. But also, if we get to a certain perspective, I will share this is how I see the physical body and the physical form these days. We are energy, we are awareness. What is our physical form? Our physical form is our most concrete form of awareness. And so what does that mean? Is that means that we have all sorts of energies that most of us cannot see, that are kind of like in our aura. And then we have energies that are more material, more concrete, and that very much is our physical body, our physical form. Energetically, spiritually, our physical body, our physical form has to do with our daily lives, our daily experiences of this world. So materialist reality, material and emotional reality, I will share. And so what happens during spiritual awakening is that We do experience changes in physiology and stuff like that earlier on the path, but it tends to be more emotional and more energetic. What happens during the later stages of spiritual awakening is really noticing where in the most concrete, the heaviest, densest energies of our system, there is blockage, there is weakness, there is difficulty moving into a mentality of that we are energy, we are consciousness, we are awareness itself. And so I will share that in earlier stages of awakening, people often need to mentally take them through sort of a process of emotionally being okay with their own death. This is a difficult thing to do, but there's a difference between getting ourselves in a mental, emotional headspace of being like, okay, I'm a human, my, body is going to die at some point, and getting into a space where our body truly understands that and is okay with that and is willing to let go of whatever remaining fear, whatever remaining separation there is, whatever is still clinging to this thought of this is concrete reality, this is my body, that sort of thing. I will say again to close that the way through this to awaken every aspect of the self is to go through the body. Otherwise, this transformation does not happen. There are all sorts of wonderful marrow skeleton meditations, bone breathing for this stage of the path that are really wonderful for, getting people to a place where their bones, where their essence, where their marrow, where the rivers and sort of seas of their bodies, all of those really deep energies can transform as well. And with that transformation, not only is that sort of the last stage of really allowing for ourselves to experience ourselves as part of a wonderful ocean, but a recognition that we are that ocean at the same time, basically that we are consciousness. Um, so I hope you've enjoyed this talk and it has been helpful for you. If you have any questions, feel free to write them below. I do find that a lot of people don't go into the technical aspects of the intermediate and kind of advanced aspects of the path. So I really find kind of parsing it out to be helpful for people. So I hope this resonates and look forward to any questions that you may have.